Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today I'm going to help you find a deck if you want to play in the historic Arena Open this weekend. It's a kind of pay-to-enter cash tournament that's held on the Arena client. If you are successful, you can win 1,000, 2,000, or 2,500 USD, I believe. And the format is historic. So day one, you get a choice of playing either best of one or best of three. I did a separate video for historic best of three, so if you want to check out those deck lists, separate video, you can find it there. I'm going to focus this one on historic best of one. And really where we're getting the data from is Untapped GG. It's a companion tool that runs alongside your Arena client, tracks your win rates, deck collection, gives you suggestions of what decks you could build based on your cards that you own, syncs like your wild cards, tracks your win rates. There's in-game overlays and stuff like that to help up your game. Free to get started with it. The link is in the video description down below. I will have all these deck lists in the video description. I'll export them from here so you can easily import them into your Arena client if you want to get started with any of these. So typically I do these each week and we focus on a week that was. I look at Platinum to Mythic. I do this for Historic and Standard each week. So these videos are up. This one's going to be focused specifically, like I said, Historic Open, kind of the spikier tournament for what you want to play. This is for the week of April 6th to the 13th, and we have 45,000 games played. Jumping into a top performing deck on the Arena ladder for the week in best of one is Historic Azorius Auras. So for those of you who are not well versed in the Historic best of one, Mono Red has seen quite an increase recently in terms of playability, and one of the decks that has the best matchup, in my opinion, is this Auras deck. It can scale up the Mono Red deck, because the Mono Red deck is a creature-based aggro deck that's usually leading up to Torbrand. It's not a burn-based deck, so they typically don't have an excessive amount of removal beyond Stomp or a well-timed Chain Whirler with a Torbrand out, but you're usually too far behind. If you go turn to Spiritdancer, you throw on some Auras, it's already way too big. That paired with Evasion and Lifelink makes it quite hard to race. This particular version here is using Light-Paws as a tutorable effect to find key pieces. Usually finds like All That Glitters or like a Vigilance or First Strike or Lifelink. It makes it really difficult. That paired with Esper Sentinel allows you to draw cards when you're playing against stuff like Control or Phoenix or Arcanist, stuff like that. Very well suited deck. The only downside I personally playing Auras, I tend to lose to the deck more than I lose to my opponent. And what I mean by that is you get these hands sometimes where it's like all creatures, all Auras, but no beautiful mix of both. And while you get games where it's like Selfless Savior turn 1, Kor Spiritdancer turn 2, turn 3, you know, strap on 3/1 mana Auras, you kind of go to town, you'll get the other games that kind of go one way or the other. So kind of, this is kind of your jam. This is a really good choice, I think. A deck that kind of showed up this week and is actually, I will call it free to play. I've never played this particular configuration and I haven't seen too much of it on the ladder. I'd be a little weary about taking this to the Arena tournament, but it seems like it's being played heavily in Platinum rank. 61% win rate. It's a mono blue tempo list. It's all commons and uncommons, so like if you want a cheap deck to play, it's definitely something to consider. This deck here, really what you're trying to do is get a cheap creature out on turn 1, so Delver's Secrets, Siren Stormtamer, Spectral Sailor, strap on Curiosity or Curious Possession, draw a bunch of cards, and then every turn just like counter what your opponent does, or protect your creature, or draw some cards, or tempo your opponent while you kind of kill them fairly quickly out of the game. This gets reduced if you control pirates, so it's kind of a way around. You have your Fairy Vandal as well that gets bigger, that kind of grows with that. So free to play deck if you do want to try that out. Wanted to include it for that. I personally would not choose to pay like whatever the entry fee is for this tournament and then bring this deck. But like I said, if you want to get started into Historic, this is definitely something to look into. What we have next is Mono Blue Affinity. So we've seen kind of a Mono Blue as well as a Blue-White version. The Blue-White version gets Esper Sentinel as well as Portable Holes. What this version here is a little bit more grindier, mid-rangey. You have access to Side to make really wide boards. Emery the Lurker can revive artifacts from your graveyard, so you get the value there. You have Thought Monitor to draw you cards, and then with like Reality Chip, you attach to one of your creatures and you can kind of just churn through your library. You have tempo effects with like Aether Spellbomb. The Shadow Sphere can make things get lifelink and trample. Nettlecyst makes things really big based on your artifacts or enchantments, and you kind of go to town like that. Now, one thing you'll be saying, but Joe, we're a mono blue deck. Why are we playing a bunch of pathways? Well, it's just the off chance you run into Merfolk and they have island walk creatures, you're not completely dead to that kind of effect without being able to block. So it's a small edge case consideration that kind of helps you out in that respect. Up next, mono red aggro, and this is probably this deck has the most variation in terms of little nuanced details. I got Mythic with this deck as well, and I'll show you my version after this. I was kind of scouring to find the one that's performing best, and from what I can see right now, this is solely in Mythic. This deck's got a 67% win rate, and it is a version that's looking to go Kumano or Ringleader on one, get your haste enabled. It's a 4 of Chain Whirler, no Ember Cleave, and this version's still playing Roiling Vortex. I've largely moved away from Roiling Vortex because there's been so many mirrors, and Vortex is pretty much a dead card if you're on the draw in the mirror because you're usually playing a bit from behind, and it's not something you necessarily want to cast proactively just because life swings can be very dramatic. I've opted to go with 4 Ferocidons, but this is a version it's doing well for others. In terms of the version that I'm running, for the last 2 seasons, I'm at 64% win rate. I've played a lot of this deck. I think overall I'll check after, this is probably most heavily played deck. This particular version's version 11, but I have a positive win rate into the mirror. And my version, I've more recently tried out 2 Cemetery Gatekeepers in place of, I originally had 3 Torbrand, 3 Embercleave. I was losing a lot to graveyard decks. I kept getting turn 3 Greasefang comboed, or just Phoenix or Reanimator. This, as well as just being first strike in the mirror, it can block well into creatures. So I found it pretty useful in that regard. But otherwise very similar. You got your Carry Zevs or Robber, or your Burning Tree. This is also just another hit off Burning Tree for another 2 mana play. Wants to be low to the ground. And then we have our Chain Whirlers and Ferocidons, 4Fs. Notably, if you have Torbrand out with the Chain Whirler, it deals 3 damage to each creature. And then I've liked Embercleave in there. And I'm a proponent of 24 lands in these lists. 23, I tend to kind of get stalled a bit. You do want to hit at least 3 to 4 mana on curve, and then it just allows you to play utility lands. So in lieu of the 20, instead of playing 23, I'm playing 24 with the Castle Emberth, which could be reasonable. And like I said, I've got up to Mythic with it, kind of playing around. I've tried out annexes. When we drop the Annex Chandra Cleave, went up the full Chain Whirlers, and then the extra Den, we've done a lot better. And then recently I've been playing around with adding copies of Cemetery Gatekeeper in here as well. I might have gone to 23 lands more recently. 17, 18, 20, 23. Okay, so take it back. I'm on 23 lands more recently, but if you're practicing, try out 23, try out 24. I'll link both lists to kind of see what you like, but if we look at, and this is what's really cool with Untapped, and like I said, you can get this, it's free to have all this tracking data. If we look at the current and previous sets in ranked, I've played this deck a lot. I've played almost 400 games with this deck, 62% win rate overall, so I've had really good runs with it. To give you an idea, it still says version 11, but I played a lot with it, so the deck I'm most comfortable speaking to is this mono red deck. Next up, Celestia Heliod. Powerful deck, but it's gonna kind of hit you in a couple different ways. A lot of mono red becoming popular means there's anti-life gain, and between Vortex or Ferocidon, it kind of shuts down the bulk of the deck. Also, if you're playing from another angle of attack, it is really bad into sweepers. But if you're seeing auras be very popular, or mono blue or even like the artifact decks, you can kind of just combo and win through it. But basically the infinite combo, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is you have a copy of Heliod, Scurry Oak, and anything when a creature enters the battlefield, you gain a life. What it does is creates an infinite loop, infinite life, infinite creatures. And what happens is Scurry Oak enters the battlefield, Heliod's life gain triggers, you put a counter on the Scurry Oak, creates a squirrel, gain a life, put a counter, rinse and repeat, circle, 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 circle. And then otherwise you're just playing some Skyclaves as utility. You have Trelasara and Voice of the Blessed to get big as well in this deck. So an option there. If you're more of a broken combo player, you want to go infinite and kill your opponent on the spot as early as turn 4. This may be a consideration. It is the Dragonstorm combo. What you're trying to do here is cast a copy of Dragonstorm from your graveyard or a copy of Emergent Ultimatum by hitting it with Mizzix Mastery. If you do Mizzix Mastery and Dragonstorm, it only gives you 2 copies of the effect. You want 3 to go full combo, or if you have a copy of Blade Wing in your graveyard already, basically what you're trying to do is get Terror of the Peaks onto the battlefield, and then you get 2 Blade Wings. Because they're legendary, they see each other and it creates an infinite loop that basically burns out your opponent. With the Emergent Ultimatum, you can also choose Omniscience to kind of get free value to cast stuff as an alternative. The Moriat, I guess, counts as another creature type, so it's just another dragon that you can tutor up. Otherwise, this deck's the all-in combo version, so you got your Otherworldly Glaze, Faithless Looting, you have Solved Equations to find pieces, you have Prismari Command as well to draw and loot, as well as make treasure. Then you have some Protection and Pact of Negation and Spell Pierce. We have Is It Phoenix? So very powerful best of 3 deck taken to best of 1, and this is pretty much a port of the best of 3 version, but what you're trying to do is get cards into your graveyard for art like Phoenix, cast 3 instants or sorceries in a turn, get them back to get value. You also have the backup plan of like Crackling Drake to become very large, not caring about graveyard hate, Stormwing Entity coming down as early as turn 3, and then with all your cast triggers, this gets really big with Prowess, same with Sprite Dragon, and then you have Ox to refill your hand. DRC also is a way to put cards into your graveyard. So another option there, if you're looking to kind of go, is it aggro-y, kind of tempo-y? If you want to slow things down, you have Azorius Control. This is a non-Yorion, non-Strict Proctor list. You're looking to leverage Wrath of God, as well as Farewell as your sweepers. You have some Fateful Absence, March of the Otherworldly, and Portable Hull as removal. You have Archmage's Charm as counter, Narset, Teferi, Wandering Emperor, some more removal, Deluge for card advantage, some Shark Typhoonies, and then we're also seeing a Baneslayer Angel in the main board, just to deal with like a lot of the aggressive decks. Some Veto's Jawari's Disruption paired with the Soul Guide Lantern. So an option there. You might see Yorion versions of this deck. You might see the Strict Proctor, Lotus Field version. They all kind of function on the same kind of core. Like deal with the early game with up to like a sweeper to a stabilize, drop a Planeswalker, crew card advantage, win 3 Shark Typhoon is typically the line. A Shark Typhoon or a Hall of the Storm Giants. We see Mono Green Elves, another deck that can be very explosive but does kind of succumb to a sweeper. If you are planning on seeing a lot of the mono red deck, I found this matchup to be really dependent who's on the draw and just who kind of has the nuttier hand. This deck can be just out of control very early, but if you have a hand of mono red of like Stomp, Chain Whirler, you can kind of control them that way. It just really depends on how you line up, and it being best of 1, you can't really sideboard or count for that, so you just gotta hope that you're doing all right. But really what this deck's trying to do is generate a bunch of mana through elves like Llanowar Elves. You have Esper Sentinel that can get you ahead. Elvish Archdruid generates a bunch of mana. Growing Rites of Itlimoc generates a lot of mana. And then with that mana, you're either pumping it into Allosaurus Shepherd or Elvish War Master to pump up your team, or you're just trying to get a Craterhoof Behemoth to pump up the team as well. With Untapped, like I mentioned, with this particular deck, if I want to build it, I need 7 rare wildcards, 4 mythics, and I can see how many I have currently in stock. I have 9 and 19 respectively. So I've never really played it. It's not really my playstyle. I personally don't like decks that just lose to a sweeper, which this typically does. And lastly, a deck that doesn't have the highest win rate right now, but it does play pretty well into the mono red deck at times. You can race them because they don't have 3 damage removal, but this is kind of a all-in combo Greasefang deck. So what you're trying to do is self-mill Parhelion into your graveyard, and then what you do is you cast Greasefang, and with Greasefang, you reanimate the Parhelion, you crew it, it attacks, you deal 13 damage, Parhelion goes to hand, you're left with 2 4/4 Vigilant Angels, and that generally is the game. You can technically get this combo out as early as turn 2. If you have Faithless Looting in hand, you discard Greasefang and Parhelion, and then you cast Can't Stay Awake, you can reanimate it as well. We've seen some more mid-rangey versions that play kind of like the Madness package, but this version seems very intent on self-milling and getting that utility value. You have ways to get, you have your Stitcher Supplier, Faithless Looting, the Undead Butcher is also there to mill cards. Goblin Engineer can tutor for your Parhelion into the graveyard. You have Revival Return as well as Can't Stay Awake all paired into there. Oh, I was going to say, this doesn't seem right, Mana Ice. Like, they are not playing this few lands. The visual view of Revival Revenge doesn't know how to handle it. But yeah, that's another deck. So I'm biased. I would go, if you're playing best of one, for my own personal choice. I like mono red. But really there's a lot of options here. Combo, control, aggro, mid-range. There's a kind of selection of all. You might also run into some Arcanist decks. I've had like so-so results with them. Some good, some bad, but I think largely mono red would be my pick. But play what you're comfortable with, play what you know, and we will catch you next week. Hope you enjoy. Make sure if you do enjoy this video, drop a like, comment, and subscribe.